Mara Whitfield thought this Halloween would be just another night of candy and costumes until she and her friend Jonah Keller found themselves trapped in a house that seemed to breathe, where shadows moved on their own, and something ancient and hungry was waiting for them in the dark. I always loved Halloween. The crisp autumn air, the smell of rotting leaves, the thrill of wearing a mask and pretending to be someone else. It was magical. But this year, something felt off. Maybe it was the old house I had rented for the weekend. Set far from town on a narrow, twisting road lined with skeletal trees, its windows were tall and narrow, framed with black shutters that rattled even with the faintest breeze. The moment I stepped inside, a strange weight settled on my shoulders, like the house itself was watching me, waiting. I tried to shake the feeling, unpacking my bag and arranging my things. The house was surprisingly large for its age, with creaking floorboards that groaned under every step. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, lengthening and twisting as the sun dipped lower in the sky. There was a strange musty smell, something faintly metallic, like old blood. I told myself it was just dust and damp wood, but it clung to the air in a way that made my throat tight. As night fell, the house came alive in ways I couldn't explain. The wind rattled the shutters, tapping at the windows with ghostly fingers. Every floorboard creak sounded deliberate, like footsteps following me from room to room. I thought about locking the attic door before going to bed, but when I went to check, it was already slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it, but now a sliver of darkness seemed to leak out from the gap. Curiosity gnawed at me. I couldn't resist. Slowly, I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. Dust swirled in the thin beam of my flashlight, and old furniture was piled haphazardly as if abandoned in a hurry. Then I saw a small, carved pumpkin sitting in the far corner. Its face was twisted into a grin that didn't feel playful. Its hollow eyes glinted in the dim light, and I could swear they were watching me. My stomach churned. I had not left it there. That much I was certain of. And yet, it was there, silently waiting. I backed out of the attic, but the pumpkin lingered in my mind. I locked the door and went to the living room, trying to convince myself it was my imagination. I poured a cup of tea, but my hands shook too much to hold the mug steady. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision. I could have sworn a shape darted behind the staircase, disappearing. Before I could fully see it, the night grew colder, unnaturally so. I pulled a blanket over my shoulders and tried to sit on the sofa. But every time I relaxed, a sudden creak or whisper jolted me upright. The whispers were faint at first, like wind through the cracks in the walls, but they grew more distinct. Words formed, though I couldn't understand them, just a hiss of syllables and tones, soft, deliberate, almost laughing at me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself the old house made noises, that the wind had tricks of its own. But then I noticed the shadows weren't moving like shadows should. They stretched toward me, curling and flickering with a life of their own. The corners of the rooms seemed impossibly dark, as if the light itself feared to enter. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud and relentless, a drum counting down to something I didn't want to face. Finally, sleep claimed me, though fitfully. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of scraping, low and wet, like claws dragging across the floor. My flashlight lay across the room where I had dropped it, but I couldn't reach it. My body felt frozen, trapped in the bed. Then, out of the darkness, I saw it, a shadow moving across the ceiling, slow and deliberate. It had no clear shape, yet it moved with intent, gliding over me like some predator. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. And that's when I noticed that the pumpkin was no longer in the attic corner. Somehow it had moved. Its hollow eyes glimmered in the faint light, and that granite seemed wider, more malicious, as though it were aware of me, watching, waiting. A cold dread sank into my chest, heavier than anything I had ever felt. The last thing I remember before darkness took me again was the whisper of a voice right next to my ear. So close I could feel its breath. You shouldn't have come. Morning came, though it did little to chase the shadows from my mind. The sun filtered through the dusty curtains, weak and gray, failing to warm the house or my racing heart. I had survived the night, or at least I thought I had, but nothing felt normal anymore. The pumpkin from the attic now sat on my bed, grinning up at me with those same hollow eyes, and my stomach twisted at the thought that it had somehow moved on its own. I wanted to throw it out, smash it, burn it, but some instinct told me to leave it be. It wasn't just a decoration, it was alive. I forced myself out of the bedroom, trying to focus on normal tasks. Breakfast, unpacking, making the place feel like home, but every sound made me jump. The floorboards creaked in ways they hadn't before, like something or someone was pacing just behind me. I caught glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye, and every time I turned, nothing was there. The house seemed larger than I remembered, hallways stretching farther, rooms appearing where I hadn't seen any before. In the living room I noticed something new, portraits hanging along the walls. I hadn't seen them yesterday. Family photos, yellowed and faded, yet the people in them seemed strangely vivid. Their eyes followed me, dark hollows that burned with unexplainable intensity. I tried to look away, tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but the more I stared, the more the eyes seemed to shift, tracking my every movement. A cold dread settled in my chest, heavier than the night before. By midday, the whispers began again. At first I thought it was the wind rattling the shutters, but it wasn't. The voice was low, deliberate, and unmistakable. Words formed, soft and sinister, calling my name in a tone that made my skin crawl. I froze, listening. There was no one in the house. I told myself it had to be my imagination, but the way the sound wrapped around me, coming from every corner, made me doubt my own mind. I tried to leave the house, desperate for any sign of normalcy, but the front door wouldn't budge. I shoved against it with every ounce of strength I had, but it stayed firmly closed, like the house itself was holding me inside. Panic surged through me. I ran to the windows hoping to climb out, but each one was locked tight, the glass smudged and cold under my hands. There was no escape. Hours passed. I barricaded myself in the bathroom, trembling, my hands clutching the edge of the sink. I could hear the faint creaks and scurries of the house around me, like it was moving, breathing, alive. And then I saw it. On the mirror, smeared with something dark and sticky. Words appeared. "You're next." My stomach churned, bile rising, and I stumbled back, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst from my chest. And then I saw it, another pumpkin, smaller this time, sitting on the bathroom floor. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I couldn't move. It felt like it had appeared there of its own accord, rolling silently across the floor. I wanted to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stared at it, horrified and fascinated, as it seemed to pulse, breathing in some rhythm that matched my own terrified heartbeat. The day blurred into night. I tried to sleep, but fear had claimed me. Every creak, every whisper, every flicker of shadow sent jolts of terror through my body. And I realized something far worse. The whispers weren't random anymore. They were laughing, low and cruel, as if the house, the shadows, the pumpkins themselves were enjoying my terror. I felt utterly powerless, trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. And then, in the deepest hour of night, I woke to a sound I will never forget. Scraping, dragging, like claws across wood. A faint orange glow flickered across the bathroom walls, and I saw the smallest pumpkin rolling toward me. Its grin was wider than ever, sharper than ever, and I realized it wasn't just smiling, it was smiling at me. I backed away, but the glow followed, creeping up the walls, illuminating shadows that weren't there before. Shapes shifted in the corners of the room, tall and thin, moving just out of sight, and as I turned I noticed something even more disturbing. The bathroom door, which I had locked from the inside, was now wide open. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even breathed near it. And then I heard Ita whisper right behind my ear. Soft but deadly clear. "You can't hide from us." I spent the morning trying to convince myself it had all been a nightmare. Maybe the house was old, the shadows playing tricks on my mind, the whispers nothing more than the wind. But as soon as I stepped into the hallway, I knew I was wrong. The air was thick, heavy, almost sticky, and the house had changed. The rooms no longer looked familiar. Doors led to spaces I didn't remember, hallways twisted in impossible angles, and every corner seemed darker, deeper, more alive than it should have been. I forced myself to move, telling myself I had to find a way out. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, louder than they should, and I felt it, the eyes. I could feel them on me, hidden behind walls, watching, judging, waiting. I turned sharply at every shadow, expecting something to spring from the darkness. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes flicker just out of reach, tall, thin, impossibly fast. Each time I spun around, they were gone, leaving only the oppressive silence behind. I reached the front door, desperate for freedom, but it was gone. Where it should have been, there was only a solid wall, cold and unyielding. Panic clawed at me, my chest tight and my breaths shallow. I tried windows, but each one revealed streets that weren't mine. Houses warped and twisted, trees gnarled and blackened, the road curling like a serpent into nothing. I had driven in on this road, hadn't I? I remembered it clearly, or at least, I thought I did, but now it was gone. I was trapped in a place that shouldn't exist, in a house that shouldn't exist, and I didn't know how or why. I wandered aimlessly, trying to find something familiar, but the house seemed to shift around me, growing larger, stretching farther with every step. I passed rooms stacked with pumpkins, each one grinning at me with hollow eyes that seemed to follow my movements. Some were large, grotesque and twisted. Others were small, rolling silently across the floor as if moving on their own. I wanted to smash them, destroy them, but as soon as I touched one, it felt heavy, impossibly dense, and I could feel it pulsing with something alive inside. By evening, the whispers had grown louder, more coherent. They weren't just hissing my name anymore, they were taunting me, speaking in low, cruel tones, forming words I almost understood. "You can't leave, you belong here." My heart thumped violently, and I felt bile rise in my throat. The house wasn't just alive, it was hunting me. Every floorboard, every shadow, every flickering light was a trap, a predator, a warning. I tried to find the attic again, hoping to hide or at least make sense of what was happening. But when I reached it, the door wasn't where it had been before. The walls themselves had shifted, and a long, narrow staircase led somewhere impossible. The ceiling seemed higher, darker, stretching endlessly upward. The small pumpkin from the bathroom was there, rolling slowly down the stairs, grinning at me like it had been waiting. Its eyes glimmered with that same malevolent intelligence, and I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard, and for a moment, I thought I was alone. But then I heard a scraping sound behind me, dragging along the walls. My blood ran cold. I could feel it, a presence moving closer, deliberate, patient. Shapes flickered in the corners of my vision, shadows that weren't shadows, twisting and writhing like they had their own will. My hands shook as I fumbled for something, anything to defend myself, but there was nothing but fear, and the sound of claws or maybe nails scraping toward me. I turned to run, but the house wouldn't let me. Hallways led to dead ends, doors opened to walls, stairs fell away into black nothingness. The pumpkin followed, rolling faster now, its grin stretching impossibly wide, glowing in the dim light. It wasn't just a decoration anymore. It was an extension of whatever haunted this place, a warning, a predator. And then I realized the most terrifying thing. I wasn't being hunted by just one presence. There were many. Shadows moved along the walls, tall, thin, faceless, watching me, circling me, waiting for me to make a mistake. Every whisper, every flicker of light, every creak of the floorboards was a signal, a predator stalking its prey. I felt utterly trapped, caught in a nightmare with no escape, my mind unraveling under the weight of fear and confusion. By nightfall I was back where I started, exhausted, trembling, but the worst was yet to come. In the corner of the hallway, the smallest pumpkin rolled toward me again, stopping at my feet. Its hollow eyes seemed alive, glowing brighter, sharper, hungering, and on the wall behind it, shadows stretched unnaturally, forming shapes I couldn't name, twisting into figures that seemed to leer at me. Grinning as I realized I wasn't alone in this house at all. And in the dim, flickering light, I understood the truth. The house wasn't just haunted, it was waiting. For me, I hid in the attic, my back pressed against the wall, trying to slow my racing heart. The room was dim, filled with dust and cobwebs that clung to my hair and clothes. For a moment, I thought I was safe. The small pumpkin sat at the far corner, silent and still, its hollow eyes fixed on me like some predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I tried to breathe quietly, but even that seemed loud in the oppressive silence. The house was alive in ways I couldn't explain. The floorboards groaned under imaginary weight, walls creaked and stretched as if expanding, and shadows shifted and flickered, even though the light hadn't changed. The attic itself seemed to pulse with some slow, deliberate rhythm, like a heartbeat that matched my own terror. Every sound I made seemed amplified, every movement noticed. The whispers returned, low and urgent, forming words I couldn't fully understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Warning, amusement, hunger. I edged closer to the small window, hoping to see outside, to find any sign of the real world. But the glass was no longer transparent. It reflected nothing but darkness. My pale face twisted in fear, and behind me the attic seemed different. Shapes moved in the corners, stretching impossibly, tall and thin, bending around beams and boxes. I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. Their eyes, or perhaps their shadows, glimmered faintly, watching, calculating, waiting. I wanted to scream, to run, but the air was thick, almost solid, pressing down on me. I felt trapped, not just physically but in my mind. My thoughts felt heavy, tangled, twisted by fear. And then I saw it. The smallest pumpkin had moved closer, rolling silently across the floor. Its grin was impossibly wide now, the edges sharp as knives. I realized it wasn't just following me, it was leading me somewhere, guiding me into the heart of this nightmare. I stumbled backward, knocking over a pile of old furniture. The sound echoed like thunder, and suddenly the shadows shifted violently. They weren't just moving now, they were advancing. Shapes emerged from the corners, twisting impossibly, moving faster than I thought possible. They didn't make a sound, but I could feel their presence crawling over my skin, suffocating, relentless. I backed into the far wall, my chest heaving, unable to think, unable to move. The whispers grew louder, overlapping now, forming a chorus of cruel, mocking voices. Words repeated, "You belong to us, you can't escape." And then, as if in response, the attic itself seemed to shiver and stretch. The floorboards warped beneath me, the walls groaned, and the ceiling seemed to rise, darkening with shadows that pooled like liquid. I tried to close my eyes, but I couldn't. Something in the room was aware of my every thought, every movement, every heartbeat. The pumpkin rolled to my feet again. I wanted to throw it, to crush it, but my hands refused to obey. The grin seemed to grow, to stretch across its small body, wider and crueler than any human mind could imagine. I realized with a sickening clarity that it wasn't just a pumpkin. It was a conduit, a piece of whatever haunted this house. Wherever it went, the shadows followed. Wherever it rolled, the house itself moved, shaping reality around it. I scrambled toward the far wall, trying to find some corner to hide in, but the attic had no corners anymore. The space twisted, warped, folding in on itself, leaving me exposed. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Tall, impossibly thin, its limbs bending in ways that should have been unnatural, its eyes glowing like molten gold, its mouth stretched into the same cruel grin as the pumpkin, jagged and alive, and I understood I was not alone. I never had been. I fell backward, tripping over a box, and in that instant the attic seemed to collapse inward. Shapes pressed closer, shadows crawling over the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. The whispers became screams, high-pitched, screaming my name, laughing, taunting, and through it all, the pumpkin rolled toward me, its grin sharper, alive, pulsating with some dark, malevolent intelligence. I felt my mind slipping, the walls of reality bending, breaking around me. And then, in the dim, flickering light, I realized something far worse than fear. I wasn't just being hunted, I was being claimed. The shadows, the whispers, the pumpkins, they weren't just tormenting me. They were waiting for the moment to drag me fully into whatever dark, twisted world this house had created. And then I heard it, a soft, wet scraping sound, moving closer, deliberate. The pumpkin blinked, its hollow eyes glimmered with cruel intelligence. And I knew, in the deepest part of my soul, that there was no escape. I woke up outside the house, the morning sun weak and gray, filtering through skeletal trees. For a moment, relief washed over me. I was alive. The street looked normal, the houses ordinary. My car sat where I had left it, and the horrors of the night felt almost like a dream. Almost I rubbed my eyes and looked around, trying to convince myself it had all been my imagination. Maybe the old house had gotten to me, the isolation, the shadows, the whispers, but surely nothing could have followed me. Surely nothing had survived beyond that nightmare. And then I noticed it. The smallest pumpkin, no bigger than a fist, sat in my lap, grinning. Its hollow eyes glimmered in the weak morning light, sharp and alive. My stomach churned, bile rising, and I threw it as far as I could. It rolled across the street and hit the curb, but instead of staying there, it rolled back toward me unharmed. My hands shook violently, my mind refusing to believe what I was seeing. I scrambled to my feet, backing away, heart hammering in my chest. The pumpkin didn't move fast, but it didn't need to. Its eyes seemed to track me, intelligent, malevolent, aware of my every movement. And then I noticed them teeny footprints around me, jagged and irregular, circling in impossible patterns. They weren't human, they belonged to something other, something that had followed me here. I turned sharply, trying to see more, and froze. A shadow moved across the street, slow, deliberate, tall and thin, its figure flickering, impossible to fully comprehend. Its eyes glimmered, the same molten hollow glow as the pumpkin. It didn't walk like a human, it drifted, sliding across the ground, silent and unyielding. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. I was rooted in place, trapped by the weight of fear, the impossibility of what I was witnessing. From the corner of my vision, I saw more movement, shadows stretching along the trees, coiling around lampposts, flickering in and out of the edges of reality. Each one carried a pumpkin, some small, some grotesquely large, all with grins that widened impossibly when they saw me. They rolled silently across the street, circling closer, like predators stalking prey. My chest tightened, breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. I understood then, with a cold certainty, that this was no accident. Halloween wasn't over. It had never been about costumes or candy. It had been a trap, a ritual, a lure, and I had walked straight into it. The house hadn't released me. It had sent me home to lure me further, to make me think I had escaped. But I hadn't. Not really. I had never left. The pumpkin at my feet blinked, or at least, I thought it did. Its hollow eyes shimmered, glinting with intelligence, and its grin stretched wider, impossibly sharp. The whispers returned, low and insistent, surrounding me. I couldn't make out the words clearly, but the meaning was unmistakable. You belong to us. You can't hide. You are ours. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The street warped, bending in impossible ways. Shadows pooled around the lampposts and houses, darkening, reaching, stretching. The air grew thick and sour, smelling of rot and ash. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move fast enough, and I couldn't understand how reality itself was twisting against me. And then I noticed it. The first shadow that had moved across the street wasn't alone anymore. More figures emerged from every corner of my vision, rising from the edges of the world. Each one tall, thin, faceless, and carrying a pumpkin. Each pumpkin's grin was wider than it should have been, their hollow eyes gleaming with cruel intelligence. They drifted closer, slower than normal, deliberate, patient. I fell to my knees, knowing instinctively that there was nowhere to hide, nothing to fight with. The pumpkins rolled closer, the shadows surrounding me, whispers crawling into my ears. My heart hammered, my lungs burned, my mind screamed, but no sound came out. I was trapped. I was caught in a nightmare I couldn't escape, a terror that had followed me home. The last thing I saw before the shadows closed in completely was the smallest pumpkin rolling directly into my hands. Its grin was impossibly wide, its eyes brighter, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I felt it breathe live, intelligent, hungry. I realized then that Halloween wasn't just a day, it was a trap, and I had walked straight into it. And somewhere behind me from every shadow a whisper hissed, soft, cruel, and eternal, "It's just the beginning."